The CBS studio lights blazed as Alara Knox spoke confidently about conservation efforts in Greece, her weathered hands steady on the desk. Then the satellite feed flickered to life behind her. A wounded cheetah dragged itself across rocky terrain, its distinctive limp unmistakable. Her breath caught. The way it paused every seventh step, favoring its scarred left hind leg. The peculiar twist of its tail when turning, she knew this broken gait like her own heartbeat. "Ion," she whispered, her professional composure crumbling. The host leaned forward. "Do you know this animal?" Alara's eyes filled with tears she hadn't shed in years. 10 years ago, she'd held a dying cub in these same hands, fought death itself through endless winter nights, then released him to the wild. Now he was dying again, struck by a tourist van, crawling toward the very cave where she'd once saved him. "I have to go." She pulled off her microphone, standing abruptly. "That's my boy." Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The remote highlands of northern Greece stretched endlessly before Alara Rose Knox, a landscape as harsh and unforgiving as the Montana mountains that had taken everything from her. At 42, her face bore the weathered lines of someone who'd spent more time with animals than people, more nights under stars than ceilings. 4 years had passed since the avalanche, 4 years since 7-year-old Lily's laughter had filled their Montana cabin, since tiny hands had braided wildflowers into her mother's hair, since bedtime stories about Greek myths and eternal bonds. Greece had seemed like the furthest place from memory she could run. The conservation post had been a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman, and she'd grabbed it without looking back. Here, among foreign peaks and unfamiliar wildlife, she thought she might forget the weight of a child's body growing cold in her arms. Her research partner, Marcus Chen, understood running from demons. At 45, the Berkeley-educated biologist carried his own secrets, gambling debts that whispered threats in late-night phone calls, promises to dangerous people that grew heavier each month. Yet in the field, he was brilliant, meticulous, the brother Alara never had. Dr. James Mitchell had become the father figure she'd needed. At 58, the veteran veterinarian from Kenya had seen enough wounded creatures, both human and animal, to recognize another broken soul. He'd taught her that healing others could sometimes mend the unhealable within ourselves. Young Sophie Williams arrived with cameras and idealism intact. 28 years old, the documentary filmmaker from Los Angeles saw poetry where others saw data, story where others saw statistics. Her lens captured truths that scientific journals missed. The money that kept their operation alive came from Thomas Harper, a 73-year-old Texas rancher who'd made his fortune in cattle but found his purpose in conservation. Tom understood predators had fought them, killed them, then learned to respect them. His donations came with wisdom earned through decades of wrestling with nature. Rebecca Stone, Alara's best friend and wildlife photographer, provided the emotional anchor. At 35, Becca knew when to push Alara toward life and when to let her retreat into grief. Only Daniel Cross, the local conservation officer, remained skeptical. At 52, the by-the-book official from Athens believed emotion had no place in wildlife management. "Animals aren't our children," he'd say, not knowing how those words cut Alara, not understanding that sometimes they were all we had left. March in the Greek highlands brought winds that cut through flesh like memory through sleep. Alara had been tracking a female cheetah for 3 days when she found him not the mother she sought, but a cub dying alone in the shadow of an ancient olive tree. The wire snare had nearly severed his left hind leg tendon, leaving angry flesh swollen purple-black with infection. 3 months old at most, his ribs pressed against spotted fur like accusations. His breath came in rattles that reminded her of Lily's final moments, and she hated herself for the comparison. Protocol was clear: observe, document, don't interfere. Natural selection wasn't cruel, it was necessary. But his eyes, golden, glazed with fever, yet somehow still fighting, looked at her with trust that defied logic. A dying cub shouldn't trust the strange creature looming above him. Yet when she reached out slowly, he pressed his burning head against her palm. "What are you doing?" Marcus's voice crackled over the radio. "There's a cub. Snare injury. He's dying. You know the rules." Alara, she did. She also knew that rules were made by people who hadn't held their daughter's body for 6 hours waiting for rescue that never came. Her hands were already working, cutting the wire, assessing damage that would have killed most animals already. The abandoned shepherd's hut they used as a field station became an emergency ward. No electricity, the generator had died weeks ago, and parts wouldn't arrive until month's end. By candlelight, with Marcus reluctantly assisting. Ilara performed surgery she had no business attempting. The tendon was partially severed, but not completely, a miracle wrapped in catastrophe. Using veterinary supplies meant for minor injuries, she cleaned, sutured, and prayed to gods she no longer believed in. If Mitchell finds out, Marcus started. Then he finds out. Her hands never stopped working. Hand me the antibiotics. For 72 hours, she didn't leave the cub's side. The first night, his temperature spiked so high she packed snow around his small body, melting and replacing it hourly. She hummed Lily's favorite lullaby, something about stars and eternal love, and wondered if grief had finally driven her mad. The second night, infection spread despite antibiotics. Green discharge seeping through bandages she changed every 2 hours. Marcus begged her to sleep, to eat, to accept reality. He's not going to make it, Alara, and even if he does, he'll never survive in the wild with that injury. He doesn't have to be perfect. He just has to live. The third night brought the miracle. The fever broke. When she offered a piece of rabbit meat, he took it from her hand, not snatching like a wild animal, but accepting like trust had been earned. That's when she named him Ion, after the eternal being in Lily's favorite book of Greek mythology, the entity that existed outside time, beyond death. Word spread through the mountain villages like wildfire. Dimitri Castellanos, the local shepherd who'd lost 12 sheep to cheetahs over the years, arrived with his hunting rifle in righteous fury. You save the devil cat that will kill our livestock, you Americans. You care more for killers than for honest people's lives. Alara stood between him and the hut, exhausted but immovable. He's 3 months old and crippled. He's not killing anything. He grows strong. He remembers what he is. The leopard cannot change spots. Cheetah, she corrected quietly. And he didn't choose to be born a predator any more than you chose to be born human. The Conservation Board's emergency meeting came 5 days later, conducted over satellite phone. Daniel Cross led the charge. Dr. Knox has violated fundamental protocols. We cannot have researchers playing God with natural selection. She saved a life. Dr. Von Mitchell defended from Kenya. Isn't that why we're here? We're here to study and preserve populations, not individual animals. Her emotional attachment is compromising scientific objectivity. Marcus, who'd initially supported her, now voiced concerns. She hasn't left the cub in 5 days. She's named it. She's treating it like... He stopped, but everyone knew the end of that sentence, like a replacement for her daughter. But when Tom Harper heard about the situation through his network of contacts, his response was swift and clear. That woman has more courage in her little finger than all you bureaucrats combined. You want to punish compassion, not with my money, you don't. The battle lines were drawn, science versus sentiment, protocol versus compassion, and at the center, a small, spotted cub learning to trust the broken woman who sang him to sleep each night with lullabies meant for the dead. September brought cooler winds to the Greek highlands, and with them, a transformation that defied medical probability. 6 months after finding him near death, Alara watched Ion take his first independent steps across the rehabilitation enclosure. His gait was forever changed, a distinctive pause every 7th step. His left hind leg held at an angle that would mark him for life. But he walked. More than walked, he attempted to run, falling repeatedly but rising each time with determination that made Alara's chest tighten with recognition. She'd seen that same refusal to surrender in Lily's eyes during her final hours. The attachment between them had evolved beyond caretaker and patient. Ion knew her scent from 50 meters away, chirping a greeting that cheetahs typically reserve for their mothers. When she entered his enclosure, he He would press his forehead against her legs, purring with a rumble that vibrated through her bones. The most extraordinary discovery came by accident. One evening, exhausted from arguing with Daniel Cross about protocol violations, she'd sat beside Ion and unconsciously hummed Lily's lullaby, the one about stars watching over sleeping children. Aeon's eyes had immediately found hers, his pupils dilating with recognition. He'd heard this melody for 72 hours while fighting death. Now it meant safety, meant love, meant the complicated thing they'd become to each other. "You can't keep doing this," Marcus said one afternoon, watching her hand feed Aeon despite his perfectly capable hunting of provided prey. His face carried new lines, shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "The board is serious about pulling funding." "Let them," Elara replied. But they both knew the research station couldn't survive without the Conservation Board's support. Marcus sat heavily on a supply crate, his usual composure cracking. "I need to tell you something. I'm in trouble. Elara, real trouble." The story spilled out like water through a broken dam. Gambling debts from his graduate school days had compounded with interest rates that would make loan sharks blush. He'd borrowed from the wrong people in Athens, men who didn't accept academic explanations for late payments. They wanted 40,000 euros by month's end, or they'd collect in other ways. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you had enough ghosts to fight." He watched Aeon practicing his adapted stalking technique, using his good legs to compensate for the damaged one. "Besides, what could you do? We're both broke academics living on research grants." The Conservation Board's ultimatum arrived the next morning via official email. Elara had 30 days to release Aeon to the wild or face immediate termination and potential criminal charges for violating wildlife protection laws. Daniel Cross had attached a personal note. "Your grief is not a valid scientific methodology." She was composing her resignation when the helicopter arrived. Tom Harper emerged like a cowboy from an old western, his 73-year-old frame still commanding despite the cane he leaned on. He'd flown directly from Texas, 14 hours of travel that would exhaust a younger man. "Heard you folks were having some philosophical differences," he said, his drawl thick as honey. "Mr. Harper, I didn't know you were coming. That's because I didn't tell anyone. Wanted to see this famous cub myself." He walked to the enclosure where Ion was attempting to catch a bird, his disabled leg causing him to miss by inches. "Well, I'll be damned. He's hunting." He's adapted his technique. Uses a rolling approach instead of direct sprint. Success rate is about 30%, but improving. Tom watched for 20 minutes, saying nothing. Then, "My grandson was born with cerebral palsy. Doctors said he'd never walk. Boy just won his high school's cross-country championship. Came in dead last, but he finished." He turned to Elara. "You know what makes humans different from animals? Consciousness language. Compassion for the broken. Animals abandon the weak. Humans. We see ourselves in them. We see what could be." He pulled out his checkbook. "How much does Marcus owe?" Elara's shock must have shown. Tom chuckled. "I didn't become rich by being stupid. Man's been sending desperate emails to conservation donors for weeks." "How much?" 40,000 euros, Marcus said quietly, having appeared from the supply shed. "Done. And let's make it an even 100,000 to keep this place running without those bored idiots." He wrote the check with a flourish. "On one condition." They waited. "That cat chooses his own fate. You don't keep him prisoner, but you don't abandon him either. You prepare him for the wild, then let him decide. Freedom or safety. Wild or human proximity. His choice." "That's not how," Marcus began. "That's exactly how," Tom interrupted. "You think animals don't make choices? I've watched cattle choose death over captivity, seen wild horses choose human partnership over freedom. That cat's earned the right to decide his future." He looked at Elara. "Just like you chose to come to Greece. Sometimes running towards something new is the only way to stop running from something old. That night, Alara sat with Aeon under stars that seemed closer in the mountain air. She hummed Lily's lullaby while he pressed against her side, his purr a vibration of contentment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, teaching him to hunt effectively, preparing him for solitude, learning to let go. But tonight, under eternal stars that had watched her daughter die and this broken creature live, she allowed herself to believe in second chances. The pivotal moment came when Ion successfully caught his first live prey, a rabbit released in his enclosure. His technique was unorthodox, using terrain and patience rather than speed. But it worked. As he fed, Alara realized Tom Harper was right. Aeon would choose his own path. Her job was to ensure he had a choice. October in the Highlands brought the kind of cold that settled into bones like grief into memory. For 6 months following Tom Harper's intervention, Alara had worked to prepare Aeon for an impossible future life as a disabled predator in an unforgiving wild. Each day began before dawn, teaching him to use the mountain's terrain as an ally. Where other cheetahs relied on explosive speed across open ground, Aeon learned to hunt from elevated positions, to use rocky outcrops as launch points, to conserve energy through patience rather than pursuit. "He's compensating beautifully," Dr. Mitchell observed during a November visit, watching Ion successfully ambush a released guinea fowl. "That rolling approach he's developed, it's like nothing I've documented before." But success in a controlled environment meant nothing in the true wild. By December, Alara had expanded his hunting grounds to include the full valley, 100 acres of varied terrain. She would hide prey animals throughout the area, forcing him to track, stalk, and adapt. His success rate improved to 40%, not ideal, but survivable. The secret midnight visits began in January 2016. Alara would tell herself she was just checking the remote cameras, but inevitably she'd find herself at the overlook above his territory. More often than not, Ion would be there, as if he knew her schedule. They would sit 20 feet apart, neither crossing the invisible boundary between wild and tame, but acknowledging the bond that distance couldn't sever. March brought the inevitable. The rehabilitation period was complete. Every metric showed Aeon as ready as he'd ever be. The morning of release, Alara found herself unable to eat, her hands shaking as she prepared his final meal in captivity, rabbit, his favorite, laced with vitamins that might help him through the difficult first weeks. "You don't have to watch," Marcus offered, his own eyes red-rimmed. The past months had changed him, Tom's intervention having lifted more than financial weight from his shoulders. "Yes, I do." They opened the enclosure gate at sunset. Ion stood at the threshold for 17 minutes, looking between freedom and the only security he'd known. When he finally moved, it was toward Alara. He pressed his forehead against her palm one last time, his purr so deep she felt it in her chest. Then, without looking back, he walked into the wild with his distinctive 7-step gait, disappearing into shadows that had waited a year to reclaim him. That night, Alara did something she'd planned for weeks. She hiked to the cave where she'd performed that desperate surgery by candlelight. There, she left Lily's favorite blanket, the one that had comforted her daughter through thunderstorms and nightmares, the one that still smelled faintly of children's shampoo and dreams. If Aeon needed shelter, he'd find comfort waiting. The watching years began with obsessive monitoring. 15 remote cameras tracked his movements as he established territory in the marginal lands where the mountains met the valley's areas other cheetahs avoided due to the challenging terrain. But Ion's disability had become his advantage. He knew these rocks, these slopes, these hidden paths better than any able-bodied competitor. By 2017, patterns emerged that defied conventional understanding. Camera footage showed Aeon near a golden eagle with a broken wing, the two predators sharing space without aggression. Weeks later, hikers reported seeing him lying beside an injured fox, not hunting but simply present. Sophie Williams arrived in 2018 to document these anomalies, her cameras capturing something science couldn't quite explain. "He's not hunting them," she said, reviewing footage of Aeon spending 3 days near a wounded deer. "He's guarding them." "That's anthropomorphism," Daniel Cross argued. though his voice lacked its usual conviction. Predators don't protect prey. Then explain this, Sophie countered, showing footage of Aeon driving off a pack of wild dogs from the wounded deer, then retreating to let it recover in peace. The betrayal came in September 2019. Marcus had been acting strangely for weeks, late-night phone calls, unexpected trips to Athens, nervous glances when Aeon's name arose. Ilara discovered the truth through an overheard conversation with a hunting outfitter. Despite Tom's payment clearing his debts, Marcus had been offered 50,000 euros for Aeon's exact location. The money would fund his sister's cancer treatment in America. "You sold him." Ilara's voice was deadly quiet when she confronted him that night. "I haven't given them anything yet, but Elena needs treatment, and insurance won't." "You sold him." It wasn't a question anymore. "He's just an animal. Ilara, my sister is dying." The words hung between them like a blade. Ilara thought of Lily, of the treatment that might have saved her if the avalanche hadn't stolen that chance. She understood desperation, understood the weight of watching family slip away, but Aeon had trusted them. "Give me 48 hours, she said finally. "There's another way." Tom Harper's response to her call was immediate. "How much does the treatment cost?" "Never mind. Doesn't matter. It's handled. But Marcus stays and makes this right." The redemption began with Marcus personally funding additional camera installations, creating an early warning system for poachers. He used his academic connections to publish papers on Aeon's unique adaptations, making the cheetah famous in scientific circles as a subject too valuable to hunt. By 2020, he'd become Aeon's fiercest protector, driven by guilt that transformed into genuine dedication. The legend of the limping guardian grew through the early 2020s. Local shepherds spoke of the ghost cat who walked between worlds. Children drew pictures of the spotted angel who watched over wounded creatures. Tourists came hoping for glimpses, though Aeon had learned to avoid human areas with remarkable discipline. Sophie's 2022 documentary, The Broken Hunter, brought international attention. Footage of Aeon's distinctive gait, his unusual protective behaviors, his successful adaptation to disability, challenged every assumption about survival of the fittest. The film asked uncomfortable questions. If a disabled predator could thrive through adaptation and show apparent compassion, what did that say about human treatment of imperfection? Political pressure mounted by 2023. The Greek Ministry of Environment wanted Aeon captured for his own protection. Tour operators wanted him relocated to boost regional tourism. Conservation purists wanted him removed to prevent contamination of natural behaviors in other cheetahs. Tom Harper, now 78 and fighting his own battle with heart disease, launched a legal campaign that became his final crusade. He established the Aeon Territory Trust, purchasing 3,000 acres of land that included Aeon's entire range. The legal framework was unprecedented protection not just of land, but of an individual animal's right to choose its level of human interaction. "You can't own a wild animal," government lawyers argued. "I'm not owning him," Tom responded from his wheelchair, oxygen tubes unable to dim his fire. "I'm owning the land he lives on. What he does there is his business." December 2024 arrived with unusual warmth, climate change making even the highlands unpredictable. Ilara had been invited to appear on CBS's Wildlife Warriors to discuss the innovative conservation model the Aeon Territory had become. She'd reluctantly agreed, seeing it as a chance to secure more protection for other disabled wildlife. The studio was overwhelming after years in Greek mountains. Bright lights, multiple cameras, the host's perfect teeth and practiced enthusiasm. She was explaining the importance of adaptive conservation when the production assistant signaled for breaking footage. "We're getting live satellite feed from one of our affiliate researchers in Greece," the host announced. "Apparently, there's been an incident with a protected cheetah." The screen behind them flickered to life. Ilara saw the distinctive terrain immediately, the rocky passage between the upper and lower valleys, the ancient olive tree that marked the entrance to Aeon's core territory. Then she saw him. He was dragging himself across the stones, his remarkable adaptation gait replaced by desperate crawling. Blood matted his spotted coat. The satellite captured the van on its side in the ravine, tourists being evacuated by helicopter, but the cameras stayed on Aeon as he pulled himself toward something with agonizing determination. Elara stood without conscious thought, moving toward the screen. The cave. He was heading for the cave where she'd saved him, where she'd left Lily's blanket 9 years ago. Her body began trembling as memories crashed together, Lily crawling toward her through snow, leaving blood trails, eyes still conscious but fading. Now Ion, making the same desperate journey toward the only place that had meant safety in his broken life. "That's him," she whispered. "That's my boy." The host was asking questions, the studio erupting in activity, but Elara heard none of it. She pulled off her microphone, grabbed her phone, and started walking toward the exit. "Doctor." "Knox, we're live. Where are you?" "Greece," she said without looking back. "I'm going to Greece," Marcus answered on the first ring. "I'm already at the airport. Tom's private jet will be ready in an hour." Sophie's text came seconds later. "Equipment packed. We'll document everything. Dr. Mitchell from Kenya. Flying out now with surgical supplies." The world condensed to a single truth: Ion needed her. The cat who'd chosen to live between wild and human worlds, who'd survived against every odd, who'd become a symbol of resilience neither pure nature nor pure civilization could claim. He was dying, and he was going home to do it. As Elara's taxi rushed toward the airport, she thought of Lily's last words, whispered through blue lips, "Mama, the stars are so close." She thought it was delirium, but now she wondered if her daughter had seen something she couldn't: the eternal connections that bind all broken things, the invisible threads that link lost to love, ending to beginning. The media explosion was instant. Hashtag Save Ion trending globally within minutes. But Elara saw none of it. She was already in the air, flying toward Greece, toward Ion, toward another impossible resurrection or another unbearable goodbye. The only certainty was that she would be there, whatever came next. The military helicopter touched down in a whirlwind of dust and desperation at 3 in the morning. December 17th. Elara had been traveling for 18 hours, but exhaustion meant nothing against the adrenaline flooding her system. Marcus met her at the makeshift landing zone, his face grave in the harsh spotlight beams. "It's worse than the footage showed," he said without preamble. 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding, possible skull fracture. The local veterinary team has him stabilized, but barely. The field hospital had been erected around the cave entrance, white medical tents grotesque against ancient stone. Inside, Ion lay on a surgical table, his distinctive spotted coat matted with blood and dirt. Tubes ran from his body like plastic vines. The steady beep of monitoring equipment seemed impossibly fragile against the winter wind howling outside. "Get out," Elara said to the gathered officials. "Dr. Knox, you need to understand," Daniel Cross began. "I understand that you're wasting time. Everyone out except essential medical personnel." The Greek ministry representative stepped forward, a manila folder in his hands. "The euthanasia order has already been signed. A wounded predator this close to tourist areas." Elara moved so fast even she was surprised, snatching the folder and tearing it in half. "That's what I think of your order. You could be arrested. Then arrest me after I save him." Tom Harper's lawyer, who'd somehow arrived before any of them, cleared his throat. "Actually, the Aeon Territory Trust's legal framework supersedes local authority in matters concerning the protected animal. Dr. Knox has full medical decision-making power." The room erupted in arguments, but Elara had already turned away, focusing on Aeon's still form. His breathing was shallow, rattling in a way that transported her instantly to a Montana hospital room 4 years ago. She pushed the memory down, forcing herself to see the injured animal, not the dying child. Dr. Mitchell arrived at dawn, bringing specialized equipment that transformed the cave into something approaching a real surgical theater. The 70-hour-old veterinarian looked exhausted from his Kenya flight, But his hands were steady as he reviewed the x-rays. "The internal bleeding is our immediate concern," he said quietly. "But Alara, the head trauma, there's significant swelling. Even if we stop the bleeding, he might not wake up. And if he does, he might not remember anything," she finished. "I know." The surgery began at noon. 18 hours of meticulous work, with Mitchell leading a team of 3 veterinarians while Alara assisted, her field surgery experience making her valuable despite her emotional investment. Sophie filmed from a respectful distance, her cameras capturing history without intrusion. Outside, the world watched. Someone had set up a live feed from the weather camera overlooking the cave, and millions tuned in to see the medical tents glow through the night. Ion. Watch became a global phenomenon. Children in Tokyo stayed up past bedtime to pray. Elderly women in New York lit candles in churches. The president of France tweeted about the courage of broken things. But inside the surgical tent, there was only blood and determination and the horrible familiar smell of approaching death. Twice, Ion's heart stopped. Twice, they brought him back. The third time, at hour 14, Mitchell's hands paused. "Alara, we need to discuss him." "No. He's suffering. The trauma is too extensive. Even if we repair everything, his quality of life. You didn't see him learn to walk again. You didn't watch him develop hunting techniques no other cheetah has ever used. You don't know what he's capable of surviving." Her voice broke. "Please, James. Please." Mitchell looked at her for a long moment, then resumed suturing. 4 more hours. If he's not stable by then, we revisit this conversation." 4 hours passed, then 5. At hour 18, as dawn broke on December 18th, Mitchell finally stepped back. "That's all we can do. Now we wait." The vigil began immediately. Alara refused to leave Ion's side, setting up a camping chair beside his recovery mat. The cave had been transformed into an intensive care unit, with heated lamps maintaining optimal temperature and IV lines delivering fluids and pain medication. Every breath Ion took was monitored, recorded, analyzed. For 48 hours, he didn't move except for the mechanical rise and fall of his chest. His eyes remained closed, the distinctive scars on his left leg the only proof this was the same cub she'd saved 9 years ago. Alara talked to him constantly, describing the weather, the people who'd come to help, the millions watching online. But when she hummed Lily's lullaby, there was no response. The melody that had always reached him now fell on unconscious ears. The head trauma was severe, Mitchell explained gently on day 3. Even if he wakes, he might not be himself. That night, December 20th, exhaustion finally overwhelmed her. Alara dozed in her chair, her hand resting on Ion's paw. She dreamed of Lily, not dying but laughing, playing with a spotted cat in a meadow that existed nowhere on Earth. "In the dream," her daughter said, "he's waiting for you to call him back. Mama, he just needs to remember the way." She woke to find Marcus adjusting Ion's IV, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "For everything. For almost losing him to those hunters. For calling him just an animal. For not understanding what he means." "He means hope," Sophie said from behind her camera. "That's what the world sees. If something this broken can survive, maybe we all can." The controversy exploded on day 4. Animal rights activists descended on the site, demanding Ion be transferred to a zoo for proper care. The hunting lobby sent representatives arguing that a brain-damaged predator posed unacceptable risks. Local Greek Orthodox priests arrived, claiming Ion was a divine test of human compassion. Environmental purists insisted any human intervention was corrupting natural selection. The circus outside the cave grew hourly. Protesters, supporters, media vans, food trucks capitalizing on the attention. Tom Harper, against all medical advice, had himself flown in from Texas, arriving in a wheelchair with oxygen tanks and determination that defied his failing heart. "You let that boy die," And I'll haunt every one of you bastards, he wheezed at the assembled officials. He earned his chance. We all did. But inside the cave, there was only silence and fading hope. Ion's vitals were stable, but he showed no signs of consciousness. The global live stream watched Alara grow haggard, watched her lips move in constant whispered conversations with the unconscious cat, watched her hold his paw through endless hours. Then, at 3:17 a.m. on December 23rd, something changed. Alara was humming the lullaby for the 1,000th time. Her voice cracked with exhaustion. When Ion's paw twitched in her hand, she stopped breathing, afraid to hope. His eyes moved beneath closed lids, tracking something invisible. She hummed louder, the melody she'd sung to Lily through thunderstorms, the same tune that had carried Aeon through his first brush with death. His eyes opened. For a terrifying moment, there was nothing in them, no recognition, no awareness, just the blank stare of traumatic injury. Then Alara hummed the specific verse about stars watching over sleeping children, the part that had always made Lily giggle about tickling stars. Ion's pupils dilated, focused, found hers. The chirp was so weak she almost missed it, that distinctive greeting cheetahs reserved for their mothers, the sound he'd made every morning for 6 months when she'd entered his rehabilitation enclosure. But it was there. He was there. "Hello, baby," she whispered, tears flowing freely. "Welcome back." The recovery was painfully slow. Aeon couldn't stand for another week, his legs refusing to coordinate properly. The head trauma had affected his motor functions, making his already adapted gait even more challenging. But each day brought tiny victories. He began eating on December 26th, attempted to stand on December 28th, took his first wobbling step on New Year's Eve. The world watched every moment. Children sent drawings of spotted cats with halos. Veterinary colleges used the surgical footage for teaching. Rehabilitation centers globally reported increased donations. The hashtag #IonStrong appeared on everything from coffee cups to billboards. But the question remained, what now? Ion would never be the same. The partial blindness in his left eye was permanent. His balance would always be compromised. The limping guardian had become something even more vulnerable, and the debates raged about his future. "He needs permanent captivity," Daniel Cross argued in a heated January 3rd meeting, "for his own safety." "He needs freedom," Tom Harper countered, though his voice was weaker each day. "That's what we promised him." "He needs to choose," Alara said quietly, and the room fell silent. "You can't seriously suggest," Cross began. "That's exactly what I suggest. We give him options and let him decide." The controversy intensified. International media questioned the ethics of allowing a brain-damaged predator to make survival decisions. Scientists argued about cognitive capacity and free will. Philosophers debated the nature of choice itself. But in the cave, now converted to a permanent recovery facility, Aeon was slowly remembering how to be himself. He would sit for hours at the cave entrance, watching the mountains with his one good eye. When Alara sat beside him, he would lean against her, purring with the deep rumble that had always meant contentment. And sometimes, when the stars were particularly bright, she would hum Lily's lullaby, and he would close his eyes and listen, as if the melody carried memories of all the broken things that had learned to live again. January in the Greek highlands arrived with unusual cruelty, as if nature itself wanted to test every survivor's resolve. Ion's physical recovery had progressed beyond medical expectation. The surgical wounds healed, his adapted gait returning despite the additional neurological challenges. But something essential had dimmed in his golden eyes. Where once fierce independence burned, now there was a hollow acceptance that made Alara's chest ache with recognition. She'd seen that same surrender in her own reflection after Lily died. The feeding struggles began on January 7th. Ion would approach his food, sniff it, then retreat to the corner of his recovery enclosure. The fresh rabbit, his former favorite, lay untouched for hours. Dr. Mitchell ran tests, checked for complications, found nothing physically wrong. It's psychological, he said quietly, watching Ion lie motionless despite the open enclosure door that led to a larger exercise area. He's given up. Alara discovered the only solution by accident. Exhausted after a 30-hour shift, she'd sat beside Aeon's food bowl to rest, absently picking at the prepared meat while reviewing medical charts. Ion had crept forward, taken a piece from her hand, then another. He would only eat if she was present, if her hand offered the food, if her voice provided constant reassurance. "This isn't healthy," Marcus observed, finding her hand-feeding Aeon at 3 in the morning. "The dependency you're creating, the dependency I'm creating, or the one that already exists." She stroked Aeon's scarred head as he ate. "Look at him. Marcus, really look. He's not choosing to live anymore. He's just existing." The full scope of Aeon's disabilities became clear during the January 12th comprehensive evaluation. The partial blindness in his left eye was confirmed as permanent, but worse was the depth perception loss that made judging distances nearly impossible. His legendary adaptive hunting technique, developed to compensate for his original leg injury, now failed him completely. He would leap at prey and miss by feet, crashing into rocks he couldn't properly see. He cannot survive in the wild. "Dr. Mitchell's pronouncement fell like a judge's gavel. "I'm sorry, Alara, but the evidence is conclusive. Even with his previous adaptations, the traumatic brain injury has compromised his spatial processing. He would starve within weeks." The international team of experts convened on January 15th agreed unanimously. Specialists from Kenya, India, South Africa, and America reviewed footage of Aeon's attempts to hunt in the controlled environment. His failure rate was now 95%. The limping guardian who had once protected wounded animals could no longer protect himself. That night, Alara broke. Sophie found her at 2 in the morning, sobbing beside Aeon's enclosure, her fingers twisted in his fur while he pressed against her, purring desperately as if trying to comfort her. "I can't lose another one," Alara gasped between sobs. "I can't watch another one fade away while I stand there helpless. First Lily, now him. I can't." "This isn't Lily," Sophie said gently, her camera for once set aside. "No, it's worse." The words ripped from Alara's throat. Lily didn't have a choice. The avalanche took that away. But Aeon, we saved him. I saved him. For what? To live in a cage, to die slowly of despair, to lose everything that made him magnificent. She looked at the cat who'd learned to trust humans, who'd bridged 2 worlds, who'd become a symbol of resilience. I should have let him die free 9 years ago. At least then he would have died as himself. The emergency board meeting convened January 18th in Athens. Representatives from the Greek Ministry of Environment, the International Wildlife Conservation Board, the Aeon Territory Trust, and various animal rights organizations packed the conference room. Tom Harper, despite his cardiologist's dire warnings, had demanded to attend in person. Daniel Cross presented the case with bureaucratic efficiency. 3 options lay before them: euthanasia, argued as the most humane given Aeon's depression and disabilities; permanent captivity in a specialized facility, essentially a comfortable prison for life; or an experimental release program that no one truly believed would work. "The animal is suffering," argued Dr. Petros Stavros from the ministry. "Keeping him alive for human sentiment is cruelty disguised as compassion." "He's not just an animal anymore," Tom Harper countered, his voice thin but determined. "He's become something more. A bridge. A symbol. You kill him. You kill hope for thousands of people who see themselves in his struggle." "Symbols don't override animal welfare," Cross insisted. "We have a responsibility." "To whom?" Tom's face flushed dangerously red. "To your regulations, your protocols, or to the living creature who trusted us?" The debate raged for 3 hours. Voices raised. Accusations flew. Lawyers quoted precedents. Scientists presented data. Philosophers debated consciousness and consent. The temperature in the room rose with the passion of arguments, windows fogging with the heat of human conflict over one broken cat's fate. Tom Harper stood suddenly at hour 3, his face contorting. "You're all missing the—" His hand clutched his chest. The crash of his falling body silenced every voice. "Call an ambulance!" Marcus shouted, dropping to his knees beside the elderly rancher. Alara administered CPR while they waited for paramedics, pumping life into the chest that had contained such fierce compassion. Tom's eyes found hers, still conscious, but fading. "Let him choose," he gasped, blood frothing at his lips. Don't decide for him. Let the cat choose." The ambulance arrived in minutes, but everyone knew. The monitors showed what the human heart already understood. Tom Harper was leaving this fight unfinished. In the hospital corridor, as machines fought to keep Tom alive, his lawyer revealed a document signed that morning. He knew this was coming. His heart was failing faster than he let on. He wanted this read if something happened. The document was simple. Upon his death or incapacitation, the entire Aeon Territory Trust would transfer to Alara Knox, with one mandate: implement a 30-day choice protocol. Create an environment where Aeon could daily choose between captivity's safety and freedom's danger. Document everything. Let the cat's actions, not human debate, determine his fate. Tom Harper died at 11:47 p.m. His final word a whispered freedom. The implementation began January 22nd, 4 days after Tom's funeral. Using the Trust's resources, they constructed a revolutionary facility at the cave site. The main enclosure, comfortable and safe, connected via a constantly open corridor to progressively wilder spaces. The first led to a semi-controlled hunting ground, the second to a partially fenced territory, the third to complete wilderness. Motion sensors tracked Aeon's every movement. Cameras recorded his choices. Each morning, he could decide where to spend his day, where to hunt or be fed, where to sleep. The data would accumulate over 30 days, creating an objective map of his preferences. "This is insane," Cross protested, watching the construction. "You're asking a brain-damaged animal to make life-determining choices. We make those choices for them every day," Alara responded quietly. "For once, we're letting one choose for himself." The first week broke hearts worldwide. Aeon rarely left the safe enclosure, lying near the feeding station, accepting hand-delivered meals from Alara. The live feed showed him staring at the open corridors, but not entering them. Comments flooded in, some calling it proof he needed captivity, others saying he was still recovering. Still others arguing this proved the cruelty of forcing choice on wounded creatures. But on day 8, something shifted. Aeon walked to the first corridor, stood at its entrance for an hour, then took 3 steps inside before retreating. Day 9, he made it halfway. Day 10, he entered the semi-wild space, failed to catch anything, and returned to safety. By day 15, a pattern emerged. Mornings in the safe space, accepting easy food. Afternoons attempting to hunt in the semi-wild area, failing more often than succeeding. Evenings at the boundary of true wilderness, sitting and watching, his one good eye scanning territories he could no longer navigate. The world watched a broken predator wrestle with the most human of dilemmas: security versus freedom, safety versus identity, existence versus life. Each choice was logged, analyzed, debated by millions who saw their own struggles reflected in a disabled cat's daily decision to keep trying or give up. Alara watched it all from her station, feeding him when he chose safety, celebrating his minor victories when he chose challenge, holding her breath each time he approached the final corridor that led to unlimited freedom and probable death. The 30 days would end February 21st. Whatever pattern emerged would determine whether the limping guardian lived in a cage, died in the wild, or found some unprecedented path between. Tom Harper's grave, overlooking the valley, bore fresh flowers daily from locals who understood that some fights for freedom transcend species, that some choices matter precisely because they're impossible, that sometimes the most profound love is letting go. Sophie Williams had been reviewing 10 years of footage for her documentary's final cut when she found it a pattern so consistent it couldn't be coincidence. Yet so improbable she'd checked the timestamps 3 times before believing her eyes. February 3rd, 2025. She burst into the medical station where Alara was preparing Aeon's morning medication. "You need to see this. Now." The laptop screen showed infrared footage from December 2015, just weeks after Aeon's release. The distinctive 7-step gait was unmistakable as he approached the original cave where Alara had saved him. He entered, stayed for precisely 43 minutes, then left. Sophie clicked to January 2016. Same cave, same duration. February, March, April, every month without fail. "He's been going back," Sophie said quietly. "Every single month for 10 years. Even after the tourist van injury, he was trying to get back there. That's not unusual. Animals often return to familiar." Alara's words died as Sophie switched to high-definition footage from 2023. Ion entered the cave carrying something in his mouth, a bright blue feather from a roller bird. He disappeared inside, emerged empty-mouthed. The next month, an unusual white stone. The month after, dried flowers that shouldn't exist at that altitude. "He's been bringing things there," Sophie whispered. "Collecting, storing, like offerings." Alara finished, her hands trembling. "We need to go to that cave." They arrived at midday, accompanied by Marcus, Dr. Mitchell, and Rebecca Stone, who'd been documenting the recovery. The cave entrance looked exactly as it had a decade ago, weathered limestone worn smooth by centuries of wind. But inside, everything had changed. Lily's blanket lay in the deepest corner, carefully positioned on a natural shelf above the flood line. Around it, arranged with deliberate precision, were treasures accumulated over 10 years, feathers of every color, smooth stones forming a border, dried flowers somehow preserved in the cave's cool air, and photographs water-damaged but recognizable that Alara had lost during a flash flood in 2016. Pictures of Lily, of Montana, of the life before grief. "How?" Marcus breathed. How could he have found these? Alara knelt before the shrine, for that's what it was, undeniably, and picked up a small wooden toy, a horse Lily had loved. She'd thought it lost in the move to Greece. "I don't know, but he kept them, protected them. For 10 years, he's been guarding my memories." Dr. Mitchell was examining scratches on the cave wall when he made another discovery. "These aren't random. Look at the pattern." The marks, made by claws repeatedly tracing the same paths, formed rough circles around a central point exactly where they used to place Ion's medical equipment during his recovery. He'd been marking the spot where he'd been saved, commemorating it with the obsessive precision of ritual. That evening, back at the facility, Sophie's assistant, a young Greek intern named Giannis, nervously approached the group. "I need to tell you something about the children in the village." The story that emerged transformed everything they thought they knew. For 7 years, the children of 3 mountain villages had been secretly helping Ion. It started with 8-year-old Maria Castellanos, ironically, the granddaughter of the shepherd who'd wanted to shoot Aeon, leaving rabbit carcasses near his territory during the harsh winter of 2018. "My grandmother told me about the spotted ghost who protected herd animals," Maria, now 15, explained when they brought her in. "I thought if he protects others, someone should protect him." The network had grown organically. Children who spotted Aeon would text a WhatsApp group. During droughts, they'd fill hidden water stations. In winter, they'd drag roadkill to accessible locations. They'd created warning signals for when hunters were near specific whistle patterns that sent Ion deeper into protected territory. "Our parents didn't know," insisted 12-year-old Alexis. "Or maybe they did, but pretended not to. The ghost cat was ours to protect." "Show them the videos," Maria urged Giannis. The children had been documenting their efforts on TikTok and Instagram, using coded language and fake location tags to prevent hunters from finding Ion. Hundreds of videos showed glimpses of him accepting their offerings, drinking from their water stations, once even lying in the sun while 3 children sang to him from a safe distance. The videos had millions of views from children worldwide who'd joined the secret conservation effort, sending donations disguised as video game purchases to buy meat during scarce seasons. But the greatest revelation came from Marcus, the anonymous donor who's been funding the sanctuary supplies, the medical equipment upgrades, the staff salaries when grants fell short, he said, pulling out bank statements. It was me, every penny from the book deals, the speaking engagements, the documentary rights, all of it went to protecting Ion. Ilara stared at him. Marcus, that must be 300,000 euros over 5 years. My entire savings, my retirement, everything. He looked at the ground. I almost got him killed for money to save my sister. Elena died anyway, the treatment didn't work. The only meaningful thing I've done since was trying to atone. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because atonement isn't about recognition. It's about action. He finally met her eyes. Every month when Ion survived was a month Elena's death meant something, like her suffering led to his protection. I know that's not logical, but grief rarely is. Doctors Mitchell had been continuously monitoring Ion during their absence, but his February 10th call brought them rushing back. You need to see what the infrared cameras caught last night. The footage showed Ion in the semi-wild enclosure at 2 a.m., but he wasn't alone. A small shape followed him, a cheetah cub, maybe 4 months old, with a severely twisted front leg that made walking agonizing. The cub was emaciated, ribs showing through patchy fur, clearly on the edge of starvation. Where did it come from? Sophie asked, already filming. Best guess, orphaned by poachers. The deformity would make it worthless for the illegal pet trade, so they left it to die. Mitchell zoomed in on the interaction. But watch this. Ion was demonstrating his adapted hunting technique, the rolling approach he'd developed to compensate for his own disability. The cub watched intently, then attempted to copy, failing, but trying again. Ion repeated the demonstration with infinite patience, occasionally correcting the cub's position with gentle nudges. He's teaching it, Ilara breathed. He's teaching it how to hunt with a disability. The next revelation came from genetic testing. The cub, a female Sophie immediately dubbed Hope, carried an extremely rare genetic marker found in only 3% of Greek cheetahs, the same marker Ion carried. While not necessarily indicating direct relation, it suggested they came from the same isolated population, possibly the last survivors of their genetic line. For 2 weeks, they watched through cameras as Ion devoted himself to the cub's survival. He would hunt in the early morning, eat minimally, then bring the rest to Hope. When she struggled with her deformed leg, he would lie beside her, grooming her with the dedication of a parent. Most remarkably, he began modifying his own adapted techniques, creating even more specialized approaches that accommodated her front leg disability combined with his hind leg impairment. He's not just teaching her his methods, Dr. Mitchell observed, reviewing the footage. He's innovating new ones specifically for her condition. This level of adaptive teaching, we don't have documentation of anything like this in wildcats. February 18th brought another shock. Rebecca Stone, reviewing her photographic archives, discovered something extraordinary. She'd been photographing in the region in 2017, capturing what she thought was a young male cheetah with distinctive markings. Enhanced analysis revealed it was Ion, and he wasn't alone. 3 other cheetahs appeared in the background, all showing some form of physical impairment. A female with a missing eye, a male with a shortened tail that affected balance, another female with what appeared to be a neurological condition causing head tremors. He's been doing this for years, Rebecca said, pulling up more photos from different time periods. Creating a territory for the imperfect, the ones who wouldn't survive in normal cheetah society. Sophie's research confirmed it, cross-referencing sighting reports, camera trap data, and local observations revealed that Aeon's territory had become an unofficial sanctuary for disabled predators. They didn't form a traditional pack. Cheetahs were too solitary for that, but they shared space, avoided competing, occasionally even coordinating hunts where their various disabilities complemented each other. "He chose this," Alara said, watching Aeon groom Hope through the live feed. "Years ago, he chose to stay where he could help others like him. Not because he couldn't survive in normal territory, but because he understood what it meant to be imperfect and abandoned." The final piece of the puzzle came from the village priest, Father Constantine, who arrived on February 20th with a confession. "I've been blessing the water stations the children create, praying over the food they leave. My grandfather was a shepherd who believed animals could be angels testing our compassion. I think maybe he was right." He produced a ledger 60 years of village records his family had maintained. In 1963, his grandfather had written about a leopard with a crippled leg that protected sheep from wolves, never taking one for itself. In 1847, records mentioned a three-legged wolf that villagers fed through winter, which later saved a child from drowning. The stories went back centuries, disabled predators who formed bonds with humans, who chose connection over pure wildness. "This place," Father Constantine said, gesturing to the mountains, "it's always been where the broken things come to heal, where the line between human and animal blurs into something else, something sacred." As February 21st approached the day Aeon's 30-day choice period would end, everything had changed. The decision was no longer about one cat's fate, but about recognizing a choice he'd made long ago. Aeon hadn't been waiting for humans to decide his future. He'd been building it himself. One rescued orphan, one protected memory, one impossible survival at a time. That night, Alara sat in the observation blind, watching Aeon teach Hope a new technique for climbing with her twisted leg. The moon was full, casting silver light across the landscape that had become a testament to resilience. She thought of Lily, of Tom Harper, of all the broken things that had found each other in these ancient mountains. Aeon looked up suddenly, his one good eye finding hers through the observation window. For a moment, predator and human regarded each other across the divide of species, united by loss, by love, by the choice to keep living when everything suggested they shouldn't. Then he returned to grooming Hope, preparing her for a future that wouldn't be perfect but would be possible. The truth had been revealed not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of 10 years of choices, each one small, each one leading to this, a disabled cat who'd become a guardian, a grieving woman who'd learned to love again, and a world discovering that sometimes the broken things are the strongest after all. March 21st, 2025, dawned with unusual clarity in the Greek highlands, as if the universe itself wanted to witness what humans and animals could create together. The official establishment of Aeon's territory was marked not with fanfare, but with quiet purpose. The innovative sanctuary model that emerged from Aeon's choices challenged every conventional approach to wildlife conservation. Animals weren't captured and placed here. They chose to come, chose their level of human interaction, chose between wildness and support based on their individual needs and capabilities. The legal framework, funded entirely by Tom Harper's estate, was revolutionary. The 3,000-acre territory operated on consent-based interaction. Feeding stations existed but weren't mandatory. Medical intervention was available, but not forced. Animals could leave whenever they chose, though few did. Within 6 months, 17 disabled predators had found their way to Aeon's territory, some guided by Aeon himself, others seeming to sense something different about this place where imperfection wasn't a death sentence. Lily's legacy. The rehabilitation center Alara established at the sanctuary's heart became a global model. Unlike traditional facilities, it focused on teaching adaptive techniques rather than attempting to fix disabilities. Young veterinarians came from every continent to learn how Aeon had developed 37 distinct hunting modifications for various impairments, each one documented and taught to newly injured animals. Marcus Chen, after completing intensive therapy for his guilt and gambling addiction, transformed into the sanctuary's most dedicated guardian. As financial director, He managed resources with obsessive precision, ensuring every donation directly benefited the animals. His published memoir, The Debt of Conscience, became required reading in conservation programs worldwide, its proceeds funding the sanctuary for decades. 1 year later, March 2026, Elara sat in the meadow where she'd first taught Aeon to hunt with his disability. The grass was bright with spring flowers, the air sweet with wild thyme. She held Lily's favorite book, Greek Myths for Dreamers, its pages worn soft from years of reading. The afternoon sun warmed her face as she read aloud about Ion, the eternal being who existed outside time, the force that connected all living things. A familiar chirp made her look up. Ion approached with his distinctive gait, but he wasn't alone. Hope, the cub he'd rescued, had grown into a young adult. Her twisted leg still caused a pronounced limp, but she moved with confidence learned from her mentor. Behind them came 2 more cubs recent orphans Aeon had gathered, one missing an ear, another with a malformed jaw that would have meant certain death without intervention. Ion settled beside Elara with the careful movements of advancing age. He was nearly 13 now, ancient for a wild cheetah. Hope played with the cubs in the meadow, teaching them the rolling pounce Aeon had invented. As Elara continued reading, Aeon rested his scarred head against her knee, purring with contentment that vibrated through her bones. The cubs gradually tired, curling against Hope, who groomed them with maternal patience learned from a male who'd redefined what family meant. Sophie's documentary, The Broken Beautiful, premiered at Sundance in January 2027, receiving a 20-minute standing ovation. By March, it had won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. In her acceptance speech, Sophie held the Oscar toward the camera. This belongs to a cat who taught us that survival isn't about being perfect, it's about adapting, connecting, and choosing to help others navigate their own imperfections. The documentary's impact was immediate and profound. Within 2 years, Tom Harper's estate had funded 50 sanctuaries globally, each operating on the Aeon model. The choice protocol became standard practice for disabled wildlife. Thousands of animals that would have been euthanized or condemned to traditional captivity found new possibilities in these spaces between wild and tame. The sunset, on March 21st, 2028, painted the mountains gold and crimson. Elara stood at the observation platform, watching Ion and Hope lead their mixed family across the valley. 13 cheetahs now moved together, some born disabled, others injured. All taught that different didn't mean less. They spread across the landscape in a choreographed dance of varied gaits, each moving in their unique way, yet somehow synchronized. As the sun touched the horizon, Ion paused on the ridge, silhouetted against the dying light. Hope and the others continued toward their evening shelter, but he remained, looking back toward Elara. In that moment, she understood what they'd built together, not a sanctuary or conservation program, but a new way of being in the world, where love transcended species and perfect was no longer the enemy of good. 5 years later, 2030, Aeon moved slowly but still visited weekly, his muzzle now gray, his famous limp more pronounced. He'd taught 12 cubs to survive with disabilities, created hunting techniques adapted for 7 different impairments, and transformed global understanding of animal cognition and compassion. The wall in Lily's Legacy Center displayed thousands of photographs, Lily laughing in Montana snow, Ian taking his first adapted steps, Hope learning to hunt, Tom Harper's final smile, the children who'd secretly protected their spotted ghost, Marcus teaching financial planning to young conservationists, Sophie filming through tears of joy. Elara, now 47, stood before that wall each morning, touching 2 photos, her daughter and the cat who'd taught her that love doesn't end with goodbye. He showed me that broken doesn't mean worthless, like she would tell visitors. It means you've survived something worth surviving. It means you have something to teach others about resilience. Sometimes the most shattered things create the most beautiful patterns when they're pieced back together with love. You know, I've told you this story because I need you to understand something I couldn't see until Elara and Ion showed me. Family isn't what we're born into. It's what we choose when we're broken. Every one of us carries scars, visible or hidden. that mark us as different, imperfect, less than what we're supposed to be. We spend so much time hiding these wounds, pretending we're whole, that we miss the truth. Ion knew instinctively our breaks are where the light enters. When Alara lost Lily, she thought her capacity to love died in that avalanche. When Ion lost his ability to run like other cheetahs, he seemed destined for death. But gratitude, real gratitude, isn't about being thankful for what's perfect. It's about recognizing that our imperfections connect us. The children who secretly fed Aeon, Marcus, who paid his debts in silence, Tom, who gave everything for a cat's freedom, they became family, not through blood, but through choosing to see themselves in another's struggle. That's what I learned from this story. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't healing our wounds, but teaching others to live with theirs. Sometimes the deepest gratitude is simply saying, I see you, broken as you are, and you belong.